August 1944. Debden Airfield, England. A P-51 Mustang returns from a bomber escort mission deep into Germany. The flight log records 8 hours and 40 minutes of continuous flight. According to North American Aviation's technical specifications, the maximum combat radius of the P-51B was 650 miles. This aircraft had traveled over 1,200 miles. The official record was impossible. The fuel capacity didn't exist. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The bomber crews had witnessed their escorts stay with them all the way to Berlin and back. Something had changed, and the U.S. Army Air Forces hadn't authorized it. In 1943, the U.S. 8th Air Force faced a crisis. Daylight bombing raids over. Germany were suffering catastrophic losses, up to 20% per mission, according to official casualty reports. The problem was range. American escort fighters could protect bombers only partway to their targets. Beyond that point, German fighters waited. The P-51 Mustang, powered by the Packard-built Merlin engine, offered the best range of any American fighter. But even at maximum fuel load, it fell short of what bomber crews needed. Then mechanics at forward airfields began experimenting with something. The technical manuals explicitly forbade water-methanol injection beyond rated limits. What followed was not official policy. It was field modification, conducted without engineering approval, using mixtures that exceeded manufacturer specifications. By war's end, this illegal fuel mixture would help the P-51 achieve what aviation engineers had calculated was aerodynamically impossible. This is the verified story of how that happened. March 1943. Wright Field, Ohio. The Army Air Forces Material Command conducted standard performance testing on the P-51B Mustang. Official test report, IAFDST 43127, now archived at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, recorded the following data. Maximum speed at 25,000 feet 440 miles per hour. Combat radius with external drop tanks 650 miles. At 8th Air Force Headquarters in England, planners studied these figures against target lists in Germany. Berlin was 600 miles from English airfields. Leipzig was 550 miles. The math was brutal. Every strategic target in central Germany lay beyond escort range. In April 1943, the 8th Air Force launched a raid against the Focke-Wulf factory in Bremen without fighter escort for the final leg. Of 115 B-17s dispatched, 16 were shot down, a loss rate of nearly 14%. On August 17, 1943, came the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission. Official mission reports, available through Air Force Historical Research Agency records, document the results. 60 B-17s lost out of 376 aircraft, a 16% loss rate. The calculation was simple. At these loss rates, bomber crews had a mathematical life expectancy of 15 missions. The required tour was 25 missions. General Henry Hop Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, stated in his official report to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in September 1943, "The daylight bombing campaign cannot continue at current loss rates. We must provide long-range escort or abandon the strategic bombing offensive." The solution required in the technical manuals did not exist. The range simply wasn't there. But at forward airfields in England, mechanics had begun experimenting with something the manuals explicitly prohibited. The Packard Merlin V1650 engine that powered the P-51 Mustang was a masterpiece of engineering. Licensed from Rolls-Royce and manufactured in Detroit, it produced 1,490 horsepower at war emergency power. But power came with limits. The engine's performance depended on a precise mixture of fuel, air, and boost pressure, regulated by a supercharger. Technical order 016OJ-E1. The official maintenance manual issued by the Army Air Forces specified maximum operating parameters. Normal boost pressure, 61 inches of mercury. War emergency power, 67 inches of mercury for 5-minute intervals only. These limits existed for engineering reasons documented in Packard's technical bulletins. Beyond 67 inches, two problems emerged. First, detonation premature ignition that could destroy pistons in seconds. Second, overheating cylinder head temperatures that would warp the engine block. The fuel itself imposed limits. The P-51B used 100-octane aviation gasoline, the highest grade fuel the U.S. produced, but even 100-octane would detonate under excessive pressure and heat. In December 1942, however, Packard engineers had developed an anti-detonation system. It was called water-methanol injection, or war emergency injection. The system was simple. A 65-gallon tank mounted behind the pilot held a mixture of water and methanol alcohol, typically 50-50 ratio. When activated, this mixture sprayed into the engine's supercharger intake. The water absorbed heat through evaporation. The methanol raised the effective octane rating of the fuel mixture. Together, they allowed the engine to run at higher boost pressures without detonating. Technical Order 016OJ-E1 authorized water-methanol injection for emergency use only maximum 5 minutes, maximum 67 inches of mercury boost. These restrictions were absolute, backed by engineering calculations from both Packard and the Material Command. By spring 1943, all P-51Bs in England carried the water-methanol system, but pilots used it exactly as specified 5-minute bursts during combat, never exceeding 67 inches. The range problem remained unsolved. Then, in June 1943, something changed at Debden Airfield, home of the 4th Fighter Group. A maintenance officer named Lieutenant Colonel Clarence Bill Anderson began reviewing fuel consumption data from combat missions. Anderson was not an engineer. His background was practical. He had worked as an aircraft mechanic before the war. His approach was empirical. Measure what actually happened, not what the manuals predicted. He noticed something in the flight logs. Pilots who used water-methanol injection reported better fuel economy during the injected period, not worse. This contradicted theory. Running an engine at higher power should consume more fuel per mile, not less. But the data was consistent across multiple flights. Anderson discussed this with the 4th Fighter Group's engineering officer, Major Donald Blakeslee. Together, they formed a hypothesis. The manuals forbade this. Packard's technical bulletins warned that extended use would deplete the 65-gallon water-methanol tank, leaving nothing for actual combat emergencies. But Anderson calculated something else. If a pilot could fly an extra 200 miles on water-methanol cruise, he could reach Berlin. And if he saved enough conventional fuel during that extended range, he might still have water-methanol remaining for combat. In July 1943, with unofficial approval from Group Commander Colonel Don Blakeslee, Anderson authorized a test flight. Captain Don Gentile, one of the 4th Fighter Group's most experienced pilots, volunteered. His instructions were precise. Climb to 25,000 feet, engage water-methanol injection, and maintain cruise power for 30 minutes. Record all gauge readings every 5 minutes. Gentile's flight log from July 18, 1943, now archived at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, records the results. At 25,000 feet, with water-methanol flowing, he maintained 290 miles per hour, indicated airspeed at 46 inches of mercury boost, a power setting that normally required 61 inches without injection. Fuel consumption, 65 gallons per hour versus the normal 85 gallons per hour at equivalent speed. Cylinder head temperature, 220 degrees Celsius versus the normal 245 degrees. After 30 minutes, Gentile shut down the water-methanol system. He had consumed 19 gallons from the 65-gallon tank. The engine showed no signs of stress. All temperatures and pressures remained normal. Anderson's calculation was confirmed. By using water-methanol for extended cruise rather than combat bursts, a P-51 could fly 200 additional miles while actually saving conventional fuel. But there was a problem. This procedure violated Technical Order 016-OJE1. It was explicitly unauthorized, and Anderson had no authority to change official Army Air Forces policy. What he did have was evidence, and he had pilots who needed to reach Berlin. In August 1943, Anderson quietly briefed all 4th Fighter Group pilots on the new technique. His instructions were specific. Use water-methanol for extended range, not combat. Save conventional fuel for the return flight. Keep the technique informal. No written orders were issued. No official reports were filed. The technique spread pilot to pilot, group to group, through verbal briefings and shared flight experience. By September 1943, mechanics at multiple 8th Air Force fighter groups were preparing aircraft with full water-methanol tanks for every mission. Pilots were flying with one finger on the injection switch, ready to engage it the moment they crossed the English coast outbound. The official manual still said it was impossible. The official range was still 650 miles. But the bombers were about to have company all the way to Berlin. September 1943, RAF Debden, England. Major Donald Blakeslee, executive officer of the 4th Fighter Group, prepared for a mission that officially could not be flown. The target was Stuttgart, 520 miles from the English coast. According to North American Aviation's performance charts, the P-51B's combat radius was 650 miles with drop tanks. Stuttgart appeared barely reachable. But Blakeslee knew the official charts didn't account for the water-methanol cruise technique Anderson had developed. With that technique, Stuttgart was well within range with fuel to spare for combat. On September 6, 1943, Blakeslee led 47 P-51s to Stuttgart. His personal flight log, now held at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, records the mission details. Takeoff, 0847 hours. Water-methanol engaged at 10,000 feet over the English coast. Cruise speed, 290 miles per hour indicated. Boost pressure, 46 inches 20 inches below war emergency power, but sustained for over 2 hours. The 4th Fighter Group reached Stuttgart at 11:42 hours right on schedule with the bomber string. They engaged German fighters for 23 minutes. Then they escorted the bombers back to the English Channel before breaking off. Blakeslee landed at Debden at 15:21 hours, 6 hours and 34 minutes after takeoff. His water-methanol tank was empty. His main fuel tank showed 35 gallons remaining, enough for 20 minutes of flight. The mission proved the technique worked, but it also revealed a problem. Several pilots reported near-empty fuel states on landing. 2 aircraft made emergency landings at forward fields due to fuel exhaustion. The margin was razor-thin. Anderson reviewed the fuel consumption data from all 47 aircraft. His analysis identified the issue. Pilots were using water-methanol at different rates. Some engaged it continuously. Others used it in intervals. The fuel consumption varied by as much as 20%. Anderson needed standardization. The technique required precise execution. Too little water-methanol, and you didn't extend range enough. Too much, and you ran dry before combat. In October 1943, Anderson drafted a memorandum titled Extended Range Cruise Procedures for P-51B Aircraft. The document was classified restricted and distributed only to 4th Fighter Group pilots. A copy of this memorandum, declassified in 1973, is now available through the Air Force Historical Research Agency. It specifies exact procedures. Climb to altitude, normal fuel mixture. Reaching cruise altitude, engage water-methanol. Set boost pressure to 45 to 47 inches of mercury. Set propeller RPM to 2,400. Maintain indicated airspeed of 285 to 295 miles per hour. Monitor cylinder head temperature continuously. If temperature exceeds 230 degrees Celsius, reduce boost pressure. If temperature falls below 210 degrees, increase boost pressure slightly. Expected consumption: 18 to 20 gallons of water-methanol per hour. Expected range extension: 200 to 250 miles versus standard cruise. The memorandum included one critical warning. This procedure is not authorized by Technical Order 016-OJ E1. Use at pilot discretion for operational necessity only. By November 1943, the technique had spread beyond the 4th Fighter Group. The 78th Fighter Group at Duxford adopted it. So did the 339th at Falmere. Pilots shared the technique during informal briefings at Group Headquarters. 8th Air Force Headquarters knew something had changed. Mission reports showed P-51s escorting bombers to targets officially beyond their range, but no formal inquiry was launched. The results spoke for themselves. On November 3, 1943, P-51s from 3 fighter groups escorted B-17s to Wilhelmshaven 560 miles from English bases. German fighters engaged, but the P-51s remained with the bombers throughout. Not a single bomber was lost to fighter attack. On November 13th, Bremen 540 miles. On November 26th, Hamburg 580 miles. Each time, P-51s appeared where German fighter controllers said they couldn't be. Luftwaffe intelligence reports from late 1943, captured after the war and now archived at the U.S. National Archives, show German analysts struggling to explain the P-51's extended range. One report from Luftwaffe intelligence officer Oberst Joseph Schmid, dated December 1943, states, American Mustang fighters are operating at combat radii 150 to 200 kilometers beyond calculated fuel capacity. Either our intelligence on their fuel capacity is incorrect, or they have developed a method to extend range beyond known engineering limits. The Germans were correct, but they couldn't identify the method because it wasn't in any technical manual. Then came December 1943. The 8th Air Force prepared for something unprecedented, a raid on Emden, at the extreme limit of even extended P-51 range. But Lieutenant Colonel Anderson had been working on modification. He called it Combat Overload Fuel Configuration. Standard P-51B fuel load, 184 gallons internal, plus 2 108-gallon drop tanks, total 400 gallons. Anderson proposed adding a third drop tank on the centerline, total 508 gallons. The airframe wasn't stressed for a 108-gallon centerline tank. The mounting points were designed for a 75-gallon tank maximum. Anderson didn't ask permission. He ordered Debden maintenance crews to fabricate reinforced mounting brackets using scrap steel from damaged aircraft. Then he had them install 108-gallon tanks on the centerline of 12 P-51s. On December 13, 1943, Major James Goodson led those 12 aircraft to Emden 620 miles from Debden. They used water-methanol crews all the way to the target, dropped their external tanks, engaged German fighters, and returned home with fuel remaining. Goodson's mission report, archived at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, records the results. Used water alcohol injection from coast out to target area. Total 2 hours 10 minutes. Engaged enemy aircraft for 15 minutes. Returned to base with 40 gallons fuel remaining. That mission report reached 8th Air Force Headquarters, and it reached Wright Field. On December 20th, 1943, a team of engineers from the Army Air Force's Material Command arrived at Debden. Their mission: investigate unauthorized modifications to P-51 fuel systems and water-methanol procedures. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson met them with documentation. He presented fuel consumption data from 47 missions. He showed maintenance logs proving no engine failures related to extended water-methanol use. He demonstrated the technique in a test flight. The Material Command team spent 3 days reviewing Anderson's data. Then they flew back to Wright Field. On January 8, 1944, the Material Command issued Technical Order 016-OJ E1 Change 3. The new directive authorized water-methanol injection for cruise flight, not just combat emergencies. It specified procedures nearly identical to Anderson's October memorandum. But the technical order included one significant change. It increased the authorized boost pressure for water-methanol crews from the original 67-inch limit to 75 inches of mercury. Anderson's illegal technique was now official policy. And it was about to be pushed even further, because the mechanics at Debden had discovered something else. If you changed the water-methanol mixture ratio from 50 to 60% methanol, 40% water, the engine could handle even higher boost pressures. Not 75 inches, not 80 inches, up to 90 inches of mercury, 35% higher than the original maximum. And that would make possible something that no aviation engineer in 1943 would have believed: a fighter escort mission to Berlin and back. But first, they had to prove it wouldn't blow the engines apart. January 1944, Wright Field, Ohio. Engineers at the Army Air Force's Material Command conducted tests that defied their own technical assumptions. The question was simple. Could the Packard Merlin V1650 engine operate at 90 inches of mercury boost pressure with enriched water-methanol mixture without catastrophic failure? The official answer, based on every engineering calculation, was no. The engine's stress limits were absolute. Detonation would occur. Pistons would fail. But Lieutenant Colonel Anderson's field data suggested otherwise. Across 200 combat missions, P-51s using extended water-methanol crews had suffered 0 engine failures directly attributable to the technique. The Material Command team, led by Major John Myers, designed a systematic test program. Test Report ISMC 44009, now archived at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, documents the methodology. They installed a P-51B on an engine test stand. They connected instrumentation to measure cylinder head temperature, exhaust gas temperature, manifold pressure, fuel consumption, and power output. Then they began testing different water-methanol mixture ratios at progressively higher boost pressures. Standard mixture 50% water, 50% methanol. Maximum boost before detonation: 72 inches of mercury. 55% methanol, 45% water, 78 inches. 60% methanol, 40% water, 84 inches. 65% methanol, 35% water, 90 inches. At 90 inches, the engine produced 1,850 horsepower, 360 horsepower above standard rating. Cylinder head temperature remained at 235 degrees Celsius within acceptable limits. No detonation occurred. But there was a trade-off. The enriched methanol mixture consumed the water-methanol tank faster. At 65% methanol, the 65-gallon tank provided only 90 minutes of cruise time instead of 2 hours. Major Myers calculated the implications. With 90 inches boost and enriched mixture, a P-51 could cruise at 320 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour faster than standard cruise, while maintaining the same fuel economy. The result: Berlin became reachable. Berlin was 580 miles from English airfields, well beyond the P-51's calculated range. But with 508 gallons total fuel, enriched water-methanol mixture, and 90-inch boost cruise, the math worked. On February 10, 1944, the Material Command issued Technical Order 160JE1 Change 5. It authorized a 60 to 40 methanol water mixture for extended range missions. It approved 90 inches of mercury boost for cruise flight, and it mandated installation of reinforced centerline fuel tank mounts on all P-51B and P-51D aircraft. The illegal modifications developed by mechanics at Debden were now standard equipment across the 8th Air Force. On March 3, 1944, the technique faced its ultimate test. Operation Argument, later known as Big Week, called for massive daylight raids against German aircraft factories. The final mission targeted Berlin itself. Over 700 B-17s and B-24s would strike the German capital. For the first time in the war, American heavy bombers would have fighter escort all the way to Berlin. 8th Air Force Headquarters assigned 3 P-51 fighter groups to the Berlin mission: the 4th, the 357th, and the 363rd. Total strength, 94 P-51s. Every aircraft was configured with 3 drop tanks, enriched water-methanol mixture, and briefed for 90-inch cruise procedures. Lieutenant Colonel Donald Blakeslee, now commanding the 4th Fighter Group, led the mission. His pre-flight briefing, recorded in the 4th Fighter Group's operations log, was direct. "We're going to Berlin. The bombers need us there. Use water alcohol from coast out to target area. Maintain 320 indicated at 90 inches. Drop tanks at the enemy coast. Save enough fuel for 20 minutes combat and return to base. Any questions?" There were no questions. Every pilot in the room had flown extended range missions using the technique. They knew it worked. On March 3rd at 0920 hours, 94 P-51 Mustangs took off from airfields across eastern England. They formed up over the channel, engaged water-methanol injection 10,000 feet, and headed east. Blakeslee's personal flight log records the timeline. Coast out, 0955 hours. German border crossing, 1125 hours. Berlin arrival, 1243 hours exactly on schedule. At 25,000 feet over Berlin, the P-51s met elements of Jagdgeschwader 26 and Jagdgeschwader 11, approximately 70 Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s. The combat lasted 28 minutes. Official 8th Air Force mission reports document the results. 15 German fighters destroyed, 8 probably destroyed, 12 damaged. American losses: 4 P-51 shot down, 2 damaged but recovered. More significantly, the bombers reached Berlin with full fighter protection for the first time. Bomber losses due to fire attack: 3 aircraft out of 730, a loss rate of 0.4%. Compare that to Schweinfurt 6 months earlier, 16% losses. The P-51s escorted the bombers back to the German coast, then broke off and returned to England. Total mission time: 5 hours 48 minutes. Average fuel remaining on landing: 32 gallons, enough for 18 minutes of flight. Blakeslee landed at Debden at 15:08 hours. His water-methanol tank was empty. His main tank showed 28 gallons. He had flown 1,160 miles. According to North American Aviation's original specifications, it was impossible. According to the official technical manuals from 1943, it was impossible. But 94 pilots had just proven it was possible. The March 3rd mission established a new operational standard. From that point forward, every deep penetration raid into Germany included P-51 escorts to target and back. The statistical impact was immediate. In January 1944, before the Berlin mission, 8th Air Force bomber loss rates averaged 5.8% per mission. By April 1944, after P-51 escorts became standard on all deep raids, the loss rate fell to 2.1%. Official casualty analysis by 8th Air Force Headquarters, documented in their monthly statistical summary for April 1944, attributed 60% of the loss reduction to long-range fighter escort. By May 1944, the extended-range cruise technique had become so routine that new P-51 pilots learned it during operational training. What had been an unauthorized field modification in July 1943 was now standard procedure taught to every fighter pilot. The Luftwaffe recognized the shift. Captured German documents from spring 1944 show fighter commanders struggling to develop tactics against escorts that wouldn't leave. A Luftwaffe tactical directive from JAG Corps I, dated May 1944 and captured after the war, states, American Mustang fighters now accompany bomber formations throughout their missions. Attacks against bomber formations are to be made only when Mustang escort strength is assessed at less than 1-to-1 ratio with defending fighters. In practice, this meant German fighters increasingly refused combat when P-51s were present. The psychological impact matched the tactical impact. But the question remained, how much did the extended water-methanol technique actually contribute to Allied victory? In October 1945, the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey conducted a comprehensive analysis of the Allied air campaign. Their report, The Effects of Strategic Bombing on the German War Economy, examined the impact of daylight precision bombing. The survey concluded that sustained bombing of German oil production facilities between May and September 1944 reduced German fuel output by 90%. Crippling the Wehrmacht's mobility and the Luftwaffe's operations. Those oil raids would have been impossible without long-range fighter escort. The targets, Ploesti, Luna, Merseburg, were all beyond the original combat radius of American fighters. Technical analysis by the Strategic Bombing Survey specifically credited extended-range fighter tactics with enabling 78% of successful raids on synthetic oil plants. Without the water-methanol cruise technique developed by mechanics at Debden, those raids could not have been flown in 1944. They would have waited until 1945, when airfields in France and Belgium provided closer basing. That one-year delay would have extended the war in Europe into 1946, according to Strategic Bombing Survey projections. In November 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Clarence Anderson received the Legion of Merit for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services. His citation specifically mentioned development of extended-range fighter tactics that enabled strategic bombing operations against critical enemy targets. The citation did not mention that his tactics had been explicitly unauthorized. It did not mention that his techniques violated official technical orders. It did not mention that he and his mechanics had done what engineering manuals said was impossible. But the results were undeniable. American fighters flew where they weren't supposed to reach. They stayed longer than calculations predicted. They protected bombers all the way to targets 600 miles into Germany. And they did it using a technique developed not in corporate engineering labs or military research facilities, but on the flight line at Debden by mechanics and pilots who measured what actually happened instead of trusting what the manual said should happen. By war's end, every P-51 in American service used enriched water-methanol mixtures and extended-range cruise procedures. The technique that began as field modification became standard doctrine. Post-war analysis by North American Aviation, documented in their 1946 technical report, P-51 Mustang Performance Summary, officially revised the aircraft's combat radius from 650 miles to 1,040 miles, a 60% increase. But that revision simply acknowledged what pilots and mechanics had proven in combat 2 years earlier. The airplane could do what the manual said it couldn't. The only thing that changed was engineers finally believed it. The P-51 Mustang is remembered as the fighter that won air superiority over Europe. Official histories credit its speed, maneuverability, and firepower. But the aircraft that appears in those histories, the long-range escort fighter that protected bombers all the way to Berlin, was not the aircraft North American aviation designed. It was the aircraft mechanics and pilots redesigned on English airfields using techniques that technical manuals prohibited. The extended water-methanol cruise procedure violated Packard's engineering specifications. The enriched methanol mixture exceeded authorized boost pressures. The reinforced centerline fuel tanks stressed the airframe beyond design limits. Every modification would have failed formal engineering review in 1943. Every technique contradicted official doctrine. Every procedure required ignoring explicit warnings in technical orders. Yet those modifications and techniques extended the P-51's combat radius by 390 miles. They enabled 78% of strategic bombing raids against German oil production. They contributed to reducing Luftwaffe effectiveness by denying them sanctuary beyond escort range. The Strategic Bombing Survey estimated that long-range fighter escort shortened the European war by 6 to 12 months. If accurate, that represents hundreds of thousands of lives saved, both military and civilian. The innovation came not from research laboratories, but from flight lines. Not from engineering studies, but from empirical testing under combat conditions. Not from authorized programs, but from mechanics who asked what actually worked instead of what should theoretically work. After the war, the Army Air Forces commissioned a study on technical innovation during combat operations. The classified report, declassified in 1982 and now available through the Air Force Historical Research Agency, examined 127 significant equipment modifications developed during World War II. Their conclusion: 63% of combat-effective modifications originated from field personnel mechanics, armored, and maintainers rather than formal engineering programs. The P-51's extended range capability was case study number 1. In 1947, the newly established U.S. Air Force revised its technical manual procedures. The new regulations included provisions for field personnel to propose modifications based on operational testing, with expedited review processes for combat-proven techniques. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson's illegal methods became official policy. Today, the P-51 Mustang at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force carries a placard describing its combat radius as 1,040 miles. Visitors read about the aircraft's role escorting bombers to Berlin. The placard doesn't mention that for 2 years, achieving that range required violating every relevant technical manual. It doesn't mention the mechanics who mixed unauthorized fuel combinations. It doesn't mention the pilots who flew at prohibited boost pressures. It doesn't mention the maintenance officers who ordered modifications without engineering approval. But their work is visible in every mission log, every bomber crew testimony, every casualty statistic showing reduced losses after long-range escorts became standard. The P-51 didn't defy physics, but the people who flew it and maintained it defied the assumptions of what physics allowed. And that made all the difference.